The rugged Apache mountains kept their secrets well, indifferent to those who wandered their perilous paths. Sarah Keller never intended to be one of them. A young teacher with more determination than experience, she had come west seeking purpose, only to find herself hopelessly lost among the merciless peaks. As night fell and hope dwindled, she stumbled upon a solitary dwelling where Tohono, a warrior who had chosen isolation over the reservation, reluctantly offered shelter. Neither could have known that their halting attempts at communication would gradually transform into something profound. With each shared word, each careful translation, boundaries dissolved between two souls from worlds that had never understood each other. Could language bridge what history had torn asunder? What happens when two people from vastly different worlds find their hearts speaking the same tongue? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Boston had become too small for Sarah Keller. Not the city itself, with its cobblestone streets and harbor teeming with ships from distant lands, but the life prescribed for a woman of 25. Unmarried, educated, and increasingly restless, Sarah found herself trapped between societal expectations and her own yearning for something more meaningful than afternoon teas and pursuit of a suitable husband. The crumpled newspaper advertisement lay on her writing desk, its edges worn from repeated handling. Teacher wanted for frontier settlement school. Unmarried woman preferred. Room and board provided. The Arizona territory, wild, untamed, and as far from Boston propriety as one could travel. You'll be back within a month, her mother had predicted, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. The heat alone will drive you home. But Sarah had simply smiled, a quiet determination hardening within her. I believe I'll find exactly what I'm looking for there, mother. What she sought, she couldn't fully articulate, purpose, perhaps, or the freedom to define herself beyond the confines of Eastern society. The journey west had been arduous. For days by train, followed by 2 days in a dusty stagecoach that rattled her bones and tested her resolve. The landscape transformed before her eyes, from gentle, cultivated farmland to vast, empty plains, and finally to the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Arizona territory. Manzanita Springs barely qualified as a settlement. A cluster of wooden structures huddled around a small creek, its promise of prosperity evident only in the dreams of its founders. The school was a single room attached to the back of the general store, furnished with 6 rough-hewn desks and a battered teacher's table. 15 children, ages 6 to 14, explained Mrs. Abernathy, the storekeeper's wife who had taken charge of Sarah's orientation. Most haven't had proper schooling before. Ranchers' children, mostly, a few from the mining families. She hesitated. And 2 half-Apache children. Their mother married a prospector. Sarah nodded, noting the woman's discomfort. All children deserve education, Mrs. Abernathy. Of course, the woman replied quickly. But you're from the East. Things are different here. Different indeed. Sarah's room above the store offered little comfort. A narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the dusty main street. The heat was oppressive, the water supply unreliable, and the isolation profound. Her students arrived with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The younger ones eyed her with curiosity, while the older boys made little effort to hide their skepticism of a city woman teaching practical knowledge. The 2 half-Apache children, Maria and Thomas, sat silently at the back, their dark eyes watchful. They speak English, Mrs. Abernathy had assured her. Their father insisted. 6 weeks into her position, Sarah found herself questioning her decision. She had wanted purpose, but the daily struggle against dust, heat, and the deeply entrenched views of the settlers left her exhausted. Her lessons on literature and mathematics seemed painfully irrelevant against the backdrop of frontier survival. It was Thomas, the older of the half-Apache siblings, who inadvertently provided the catalyst for change. "Teacher," he said one afternoon as the other children filed out, "you should learn our words too." Sarah looked up from gathering her papers. "Your words. My grandfather's words. Apache words." The boy shifted uncomfortably. Father won't let Mother teach us, but Grandfather says without the words, we forget who we are. The simplicity of his statement struck her. In all her preparation for teaching these children the fundamentals of white education, she had never considered what they might teach her. Perhaps you could teach me a few words, she suggested. Thomas shook his head, eyes suddenly guarded. Grandfather says white people take everything, even words. He left her standing alone in the schoolroom, his comment echoing in the silence. That Saturday, Sarah made her decision. She needed perspective, space to think beyond the confines of the settlement. The mountains that loomed to the east had been calling to her since her arrival, their purple shadows promising solitude and clarity. Just a day trip, she assured Mrs. Abernathy, packing a small satchel with her journal, some bread and cheese, and a canteen of water. I'll be back before dark. Those mountains aren't for Sunday picnics, Miss Keller, the woman warned. Easy to get turned around up there. Sarah patted the small compass in her pocket. I'll stay on the lower trails. I just need some fresh air. As she set out toward the foothills, Sarah felt a sense of liberation. The small leather-bound journal tucked into her satchel would capture her thoughts, perhaps help her reconcile her grand expectations with the harsh realities of frontier life. She couldn't have known that by nightfall, both the compass and her certainty would fail her, setting in motion events that would transform her understanding of language, love, and belonging in ways she could never have imagined. The morning air carried a crispness that Boston summers never offered. Sarah breathed deeply as she followed the narrow trail upward, each step distancing her from the settlement's dust and demands. Her skirt, the most practical one she owned, though still woefully unsuited for hiking, caught occasionally on scrub brush, but she pressed on with determined steps. By mid-morning, she had reached a small plateau that offered her first real vista. Below, Manzanita Springs appeared as little more than a collection of toy-sized structures, vulnerable against the vast landscape. Above and beyond, the mountains rose in majestic tiers, their rugged faces catching the sunlight. Sarah settled on a flat rock, withdrew her journal, and began to write. The settlement looked so insignificant from here, a brief human interruption in nature's domain. Perhaps that's what unsettles the people below, the constant reminder of their temporary claim on this ancient land. Time slipped away as she filled pages with observations and reflections. When Sarah finally looked up, she noticed clouds gathering over the higher peaks, dark, heavy formations that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Just a summer storm, she reassured herself, though a flicker of concern prompted her to pack her things. She retrieved the small brass compass from her pocket and frowned at the needle, which seemed to waver indecisively between directions. That can't be right, she murmured, tapping the glass face. The needle swung wildly, then settled pointing in a direction that Sarah was certain wasn't south. She glanced at the sun, now obscured by thickening clouds, and tried to orient herself. The trail she had followed upward was no longer clearly visible, or rather, several faint paths now seemed to branch in different directions. Had she wandered from her original route while lost in thought? Stay calm, she instructed herself firmly. Follow the downward path. All routes must lead to the valley eventually. She chose the most defined trail and began her descent. The first raindrops fell, large, isolated splashes that quickly became a steady patter. Sarah quickened her pace, feet slipping occasionally on the increasingly muddy ground. The trail narrowed, then seemed to vanish entirely into a rocky wash. The rain intensified. Within minutes, Sarah's dress was soaked through, clinging to her legs and impeding her movement. Her hat, utterly useless against the downpour, was stowed in her satchel alongside her precious journal, which she had wrapped in her shawl for protection. The compass, consulted again with increasingly damp fingers, now refused to settle on any direction. Sarah realized with dawning horror that the metal deposits in these mountains, the very reason for the mining operations in the region, were rendering her navigation tool useless. Hours passed in confused wandering. Each attempt to regain her bearings led Sarah further into unknown territory. The rain eventually stopped, but the heavy clouds remained, obscuring any help the sun might have offered. As afternoon faded toward evening, the temperature dropped sharply. "Hello?" she called occasionally, her voice sounding small against the vastness. "Can anyone hear me?" Only the wind answered, whistling through rock formations with an almost mournful tone. Exhaustion began to take its toll. Sarah's legs trembled with fatigue, and hunger gnawed at her stomach, the small lunch she had packed long since consumed. Worse than the physical discomfort was the growing fear. She had heard stories of the mountain's dangers: flash floods, venomous creatures, and the unforgiving elements that could claim a life in a single night. As dusk approached, Sarah's situation became dire. The temperature continued to drop, and her wet clothing offered little protection. Finding shelter became her priority. She followed a narrow ravine, hoping it might lead to some form of protection from the elements. The fading light played tricks on her eyes. Twice she thought she saw movement among the rocks, perhaps deer or something less benign. The third time, she froze, certain that eyes were watching her from the gathering shadows. "Please," she whispered, though to whom she wasn't sure. "I need help." Night fell completely, bringing a darkness more profound than Sarah had ever experienced. No city glow, no street lamps, not even the faint illumination of settlement windows in the distance. Just impenetrable blackness broken only by occasional glimpses of cloud-obscured stars. She stumbled forward, hands outstretched, until her fingers brushed against a rock wall. Following its contour, she discovered a slight overhang. Not a cave, but some protection from the night air. Sarah huddled beneath it, drawing her knees to her chest in a futile attempt to preserve warmth. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by shivers and the strange sounds of the wilderness at night. During one such wakeful period, Sarah noticed a faint glow in the distance. Too steady for lightning, too isolated for a settlement. Fire. A campfire. Gathering her remaining strength, Sarah pushed herself upright. Her limbs protested, stiff from cold and inactivity, but the distant light kindled a desperate hope. She moved toward it with renewed purpose, even as her rational mind warned that the mountains held dangers beyond mere exposure and hunger. At that moment, however, any human presence seemed preferable to facing the night alone. Tohono had sensed the intruder long before he heard the stumbling footsteps. 20 years of solitude had sharpened his awareness to the mountain's rhythms. The wind's changing pitch, birds falling silent, the subtle shift in air that signaled a foreign presence. He sat motionless beside his small fire, a piece of juniper wood half-carved into an eagle's form in his weathered hands. His dwelling, a skillful blend of natural cave and constructed shelter, perched on a secluded ledge that few white men had ever seen. Those who ventured too close rarely left to speak of it. Not that Tohono killed indiscriminately. He simply ensured they found their way back to their settlements with no memory of his existence. The carving knife paused mid-stroke as a sound, distinctly human, reached him. A voice. A woman's voice, speaking English. Tohono's brow furrowed. Women seldom ventured this far into the mountains, especially alone. He moved silently to the edge of his perimeter, a shadow among shadows. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting enough light to reveal a figure stumbling up the rocky slope. Her clothing, impractical, sodden, unmistakably white, clung to her slender frame. She paused frequently, her breathing labored. Tohono's first impulse was to retreat inside, douse his fire, and let the mountain claim another victim who had no business in its domain. The Apache had learned through bitter experience that contact with white settlers brought only misery. But something in the woman's desperate determination gave him pause. She had nearly reached the clearing before his shelter when her legs finally gave way. She collapsed with a soft cry, more of resignation than pain. For long moments she didn't move. Tohono waited, knife still gripped in his hand. Perhaps the problem would resolve itself. But then came a sound that stirred something long dormant within him. A quiet sob, quickly stifled, as if the woman were too proud to surrender completely to her despair even with no one to witness it. "Foolish white woman," he muttered in his native tongue. "The mountain is not your place." Against his better judgment, Tohono stepped from the shadows. The woman, didn't notice him at first, her face buried in her arms as she struggled to regain her composure. When his moccasined foot dislodged a small stone, her head snapped up, eyes wide with fear and desperate hope. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. The Apache warrior in his traditional buckskins and the bedraggled white schoolteacher in her ruined dress. Fear flashed across her face, followed immediately by relief so profound it seemed to drain her remaining strength. "Thank God," she whispered. "Please, help me." She tried to stand but swayed dangerously. Tohono remained still, his expression impassive as he weighed his options. He could direct her back toward the settlement, a journey she clearly couldn't make in her current condition. He could leave her with water and return to his solitude. Or, the decision was made for him when she pitched forward in a dead faint. Muttering curses in Apache, Tohono scooped up her slight form. She weighed little, her skin cold and clammy against his arms. Practical concerns overrode his reluctance. No one, not even a white woman, deserved to die from exposure when he had the means to prevent it. Inside his dwelling, he placed her on a bed of hides near the fire. The woman remained unconscious as he efficiently removed her soaked outer garments, keeping her underclothes intact for modesty. He covered her with a warm buffalo robe, then set water to heat over the fire. While she slept, Tohono studied her face. Young, perhaps 30 winters, though white women were often difficult to age. Her features, relaxed in unconsciousness, showed character rather than conventional beauty. A strong jaw, generous mouth, and brow that suggested intelligence. Her hands, though delicate, bore calluses that spoke of work. Not a typical white woman from the settlements, then. Interesting. He returned to his carving, the eagle taking shape beneath his skilled hands. The repetitive motion calmed him as he contemplated the complication she represented. 20 years of carefully maintained isolation, compromised in an instant of reluctant compassion. The woman stirred after an hour, consciousness returning gradually. Tohono watched as confusion gave way to memory and then to wariness as she registered his presence across the fire. She clutched the buffalo robe tighter and attempted to speak, her voice emerging as a croak. Tohono wordlessly offered a cup of water, maintaining his distance. She drank cautiously, eyes never leaving his face. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I'm Sarah Keller, the teacher from Manzanita Springs." She spoke slowly, as if he might not understand English. Tohono gave no indication that he comprehended her words, though he had learned the white man's language years ago. Knowledge concealed was power preserved. "Do you speak English?" she asked, enunciating carefully. He remained silent, watching her discomfort grow under his steady gaze. "I was walking in the mountains and got lost," she continued, gesturing vaguely toward the entrance. "The storm, my compass." Tohono placed another log on the fire, still offering no response. Sarah Keller straightened her shoulders, a flash of determination replacing her uncertainty. "I need to return to the settlement," she said firmly. "Can you help me find the way when morning comes?" Instead of answering, Tohono rose and moved to the cave entrance, pulling aside the hide covering. Outside, the storm had returned with greater fury, rain driving horizontally on howling wind. The message was clear enough. No one would be traveling anywhere for some time. Sarah's face fell as she registered her predicament. Stranded in a remote dwelling with a silent Apache warrior who might or might not wish her well. Tohono returned to his carving, the eagle's wings beginning to emerge from the juniper wood. The woman watched him, her exhaustion eventually overcoming her apprehension. As she drifted back to sleep, Tohono allowed himself a small frown. The mountain had delivered this problem to his doorstep. Now he would have to decide what to do with her. Sarah woke to the persistent drumming of rain against stone. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't recall where she was. The space around her too dark, the air too thick with unfamiliar scents of smoke, herbs, and leather. Then memory flooded back. The mountain, the storm, the silent Apache man. She pushed herself upright, wincing at her body's protests. Every muscle ached from yesterday's ordeal, and her throat felt raw from cold and exertion. The buffalo robe slipped from her shoulders, reminding her with a flush of embarrassment that she wore only her undergarments beneath it. Her outer clothing hung near the fire, now reduced to embers casting a dull orange glow through the dwelling. The Apache man was nowhere to be seen. Sarah gathered the robe around herself and took stock of her surroundings. The shelter was larger than she had initially perceived. A natural cave extended and enclosed with skillful stonework and timber. One section housed sleeping quarters where she now sat. Another contained a cooking area with various vessels and tools meticulously arranged. Against the far wall stood a rack of weapons, bows, knives, and what appeared to be a captured cavalry rifle. Near her makeshift bed sat a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Sarah hesitated, then carefully unwrapped it to reveal several dried plants, a small stone mortar and pestle, and a gourd containing a pungent salve. A medicine bundle, she realized, and presumably left for her use. The hide covering the entrance rustled, and Sarah clutched the robe tighter as her reluctant host entered. He carried an armful of firewood and a small game bird, already dressed for cooking. If her state of undress or her examination of his medicine bundle troubled him, his impassive expression revealed nothing. "Good morning," Sarah ventured. "I hope you don't mind. I was looking at your medicines." The man stacked the wood precisely beside the fire pit, then set about rekindling the flames without acknowledging her words. Rain continued to lash the dwelling, occasional gusts driving it through the smallest openings in the entrance covering. Sarah cleared her throat. "My name is Sarah Keller," she repeated from the previous night. "I teach at the settlement school." She pointed to herself. "Sarah." After a moment's consideration, the man touched his own chest. "Tohono." Progress, however minimal. Sarah smiled, encouraged. "Tohono," she repeated carefully. "Thank you for helping me, Tohono." He gave a barely perceptible nod, then gestured to the medicine bundle beside her before pointing to her chest, miming deep breathing difficulties. "Yes, I was having trouble breathing last night," Sarah confirmed, exaggerating a cough for clarity. "You left these for me to use?" Tohono approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance. He mimed grinding the herbs, mixing them with water and drinking. Sarah followed his instructions, crushing the dried leaves in the mortar and adding water from a nearby skin to create a bitter-smelling tea. She grimaced at the first sip but persevered under Tohono's watchful gaze. As she drank, Tohono prepared the bird for cooking, spitting it over the now crackling fire. His movements were efficient, deliberate, each action serving a clear purpose. Sarah found herself studying his hands, strong and weathered, yet capable of both the utilitarian task before him and the delicate carving she'd observed the previous night. The carved wooden eagle now sat on a small shelf among similar figures. A bear, a wolf, a mountain lion, each rendered with remarkable attention to detail. "Did you make those?" Sarah asked, pointing to the carvings when she'd finished her tea. Tohono followed her gaze and nodded once. "They're beautiful," she said sincerely. "You're very skilled." Something flickered across his stoic features, perhaps surprise at her genuine admiration. The storm outside intensified, wind howling around the stone dwelling like a living entity seeking entrance. A sudden violent gust sent a cascade of water through the entrance, puddling on the packed earth floor. Tohono moved quickly to secure the covering, adding a second hide to reinforce it against the elements. When he turned back, his expression had changed subtly, conveying what Sarah interpreted as resignation. He gestured to the storm, then held up 4 fingers. 4. Sarah considered. 4 hours. Tohono shook his head. 4 days. This earned a nod. The implication settled heavily. 4 days before she could reasonably attempt the journey back to the settlement. 4 days in this small dwelling with a man who either couldn't or wouldn't speak to her. Strangely, the prospect didn't frighten her as it perhaps should have. Despite his intimidating appearance and reticence, Tohono had shown her only consideration. His dwelling, while primitive by Boston standards, offered genuine comfort and protection from a storm that might have claimed her life. Sarah watched as he turned the spit, the cooking bird filling the space with a savory aroma that reminded her how long it had been since she'd eaten properly. Her stomach growled audibly, causing Tohono to glance at her with what might have been the ghost of amusement in his dark eyes. "For days," Sarah repeated softly to herself. Time enough to recover her strength. Time enough, perhaps, to bridge the vast silence between them. By the second day of the storm, the silence had become unbearable for Sarah. She had spent her life surrounded by words, in books, in classrooms, in the constant chatter of Boston society. This vast quiet, broken only by the storm's rage and the occasional crackle of the fire, pressed against her like a physical weight. Her clothing had dried, allowing her some dignity as she moved about the confined space. Tohono had permitted her exploration of his dwelling with watchful tolerance, though certain areas, particularly a small alcove covered by an intricate woven blanket, remained clearly off-limits. Sarah sat cross-legged on a woven mat, her journal open before her. She had been sketching crude representations of objects in the dwelling, a plan forming in her mind. If she was to be stranded here, she might as well make productive use of the time. "Tohono," she said, waiting until he looked up from the arrows he was fletching. She pointed to the fire. "Fire." He regarded her impassively. "Fire," she repeated, pointing again. After a long moment, he spoke softly. "Ka." Sarah smiled, quickly writing the word phonetically in her journal. "Ko," she repeated, her pronunciation imperfect but earnest. Tohono's expression remained neutral, but he didn't return to his task. Sarah took this as encouragement. She pointed to a water skin hanging nearby. "Water. Tu." "Tu," she echoed, adding it to her growing list. She pointed to the ground. "Earth. And I. This continued for several minutes, Sarah naming objects in English, Tohono providing the Apache equivalent, Sarah recording and repeating. When she reached for a piece of charcoal to draw with, inspiration struck. Using the charcoal, she sketched a rough outline of the dwelling on a blank page of her journal. Beneath it, she wrote house in neat script. She showed it to Tohono. "House," she said clearly. He studied the drawing, then her face. Something shifted in his eyes, a recognition of her intent, perhaps even approval of her approach. "Gawa," he said. Sarah added the word to her drawing, then made a new sketch, a simple human figure. "Person. Dine. Woman?" she asked, adding long hair to the figure. "Istsen. Man?" She modified the drawing. "Hustin." With each exchange, Tohono's responses came more readily. Sarah's journal pages filled with drawings and paired words, crude but effective bridges between their languages. When she sketched the eagle carving and Tohono provided itza, he unexpectedly reached for the charcoal. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. With surprising skill, he improved her rudimentary eagle drawing, adding detailed feathers and a fiercer aspect to the beak. The resulting image captured the essence of his carving far better than her attempt. "You draw well," Sarah said, her admiration genuine. Tohono returned the charcoal without comment, but something had subtly changed in his demeanor. When Sarah resumed her language lesson, pointing to her own eyes, he not only provided bina, but added, in careful English, eyes. "Blue." Sarah's head snapped up in surprise. "You speak English." Tohono's face revealed nothing, but he nodded once. "Some. Why didn't you say so?" The question escaped before she could consider its wisdom. His answer came after a lengthy pause. "Words, power. Give too soon, lose advantage." The frank admission startled a laugh from Sarah. "That's remarkably honest." Tohono studied her reaction, seeming to gauge whether her amusement signaled offense. "White people talk too much, say little. And Apaches? Say much with few words. Or none." He gestured toward the storm outside. "For days. Need words." Sarah understood the pragmatic decision. They would be confined together for days. Some form of communication was necessary for mutual sanity. Still, His admission of deliberately withholding his English knowledge stung slightly. "How did you learn English?" she asked. Tohono's expression darkened. "Mission school. 3 winters. Before." He trailed off, the shadow of old pain crossing his features. Sarah sensed dangerous territory. She redirected, pointing to her journal. "I'm a teacher. At the settlement. Know this." He tapped his temple. "Watched settlement. See school." The revelation sent a chill through Sarah. He had observed them from afar, perhaps for months, while remaining undetected. How vulnerable they all were, never suspecting his presence in the nearby mountains. "Why do you live alone?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "Most Apache are on the reservation now." His face hardened. "Reservation death. Slow death." He made a sweeping gesture toward the mountain beyond the dwelling. "Here, live free." The conviction in his voice silenced further questions. Sarah returned to her language exchange, pointing to the buffalo robe that had kept her warm. "Buffalo. Ioni." They continued until the light began to fade, necessitating the lighting of a small oil lamp. Sarah's journal now contained dozens of paired words, a modest beginning to a bridge between worlds. As she reviewed her notes, Tohono unexpectedly spoke. "Tomorrow," he said, his English careful but clear, "I teach words for important things. Survival words." He pointed to her journal. "You teach me writing." Sarah looked up in surprise. "You want to learn to write?" Tohono nodded slowly. "Words on paper stay when people go." Something haunted flashed behind his eyes. "My people's words disappearing." The simple statement contained volumes of loss that Sarah, with her sheltered Boston upbringing, could scarcely comprehend. She closed her journal gently. "I would be honored to teach you," she said softly. That night, as the storm continued its assault on the mountain, Sarah lay awake on her bed of furs, listening to Tohono's steady breathing from across the dwelling. The distance between them remained vast, cultural, historical, personal. Yet the day's exchange of words had created the first tentative footbridge across the chasm. She clutched her journal close, this tangible record of connection, and wondered what other discoveries awaited in the days to come. Dawn brought no relief from the storm. If anything, the wind had intensified overnight, howling through the mountain passes with renewed fury. Sarah woke to find Tohono already active, tending the fire and preparing a simple porridge of ground corn and dried berries. "Storm strong," he said when he noticed her stirring. 2 more days." Sarah nodded, accepting the wooden bowl he offered. The porridge was bland but warming, and she ate gratefully. As she finished, she noticed Tohono watching her with an evaluative gaze. "Your ankle," he said, gesturing. "Show." Sarah extended her right leg, suddenly aware of the dull throb that had been masked by her general discomfort. The ankle was swollen, with mottled bruising spreading above the joint. Tohono's face remained impassive, but his gentle touch as he examined the injury betrayed concern. "Bad sprain. Need healing time." He reached for his medicine bundle. "Even when storm ends, you stay. Cannot walk mountain paths." The news should have distressed her more. The settlement would surely be organizing a search by now, worried about their missing teacher. Yet Sarah felt a curious relief at the enforced extension of her stay. There was something compelling about this man and his solitary existence that she wasn't ready to leave behind unexplored. "We should mark the days," she suggested, reaching for her journal. On a fresh page, she drew a crude calendar grid. "Today is October 12th. She marked the date, then counted forward. "If the storm ends in 2 days, and my ankle needs—" "How long?" 7 days for safe walking," Tohono estimated. Sarah nodded, marking the dates accordingly. "So I might return to the settlement by October 21st. The span of time stretched before her. 9 more days in this remote dwelling with a man who remained largely a mystery. Tohono studied the calendar with interest. "Your people count days differently. How do the Apache mark time?" He gestured to the entrance. "Moons, seasons, not small boxes." This led to an impromptu lesson on timekeeping. Tohono explained the Apache lunar calendar, with moons named for natural events, when leaves fall, when snow melts, when thunder sounds. Sarah recorded these in her journal, adding her own calendar alongside for comparison. As morning progressed into afternoon, their exchange of language became more structured. Sarah discovered that Tohono was a quick study, grasping the basics of written English with remarkable speed. "You learned to read at the mission school?" she asked as he carefully copied letters. A shadow crossed his face. "Some. Before I left." "Why did you leave?" His hands stilled. "They tried to kill the Apache in me." The simple statement contained volumes of pain. "Cut hair. Beat Apache words from mouth. Say Apache ways evil." Sarah's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. You not do this." "No, but my people did. Are still doing it." She thought of Thomas and Maria in her classroom, forbidden by their father to speak their mother's language. "It's wrong." Tohono studied her face, seeming to weigh the sincerity of her words. After a moment, he returned to his writing practice. The afternoon brought a shift to survival vocabulary. Tohono led Sarah through essential terms, words for dangerous plants, weather warnings, animal tracks. She dutifully recorded each one, sensing that these lessons were more than academic exercise. They were practical knowledge that might save her life in this unforgiving terrain. When Tohono described the signs of an approaching mountain lion, Sarah shuddered. "Are there many predators near your home?" "All life is predator or prey," he answered matter-of-factly. "Sometimes both." "Which are you?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Once predator," he said after consideration. "Warrior. Now," he gestured vaguely, "observer." "And me?" Sarah asked, curious how he categorized her. Tohono's mouth corked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Disturber." The unexpected touch of humor startled a laugh from Sarah. "Fair enough." As evening approached, Tohono prepared a stew from dried meat and wild onions. The simple meal shared in companionable silence marked another subtle shift in their dynamic, from reluctant host and unwelcome guest to something approaching mutual respect. While they ate, Sarah noticed Tohono occasionally massaging his right shoulder, a flicker of discomfort crossing his stoic features. "You're in pain," she observed. He shrugged dismissively. "Old wound. Speaks louder in storms." "May I?" Sarah asked, setting aside her empty bowl and moving toward him. Wariness flashed in his eyes, but after a moment's hesitation, he turned slightly, granting access to his shoulder. Sarah gently probed the area, feeling the knotted muscles and the ridge of an old scar beneath the buckskin shirt. "My father suffered similar pains from an old war injury," she explained as she applied careful pressure. "I used to help him like this." Gradually, Tohono's tension eased under her ministrations. Neither spoke during the brief physical contact, yet something profound was exchanged, a wordless trust that transcended their linguistic efforts. When she finished, Tohono nodded once in acknowledgement. "Pinagoa," he said softly. "What does that mean?" "Thank you." Sarah smiled. "You're welcome." "Haguni. Is that right?" "You're welcome." A rare expression of approval crossed Tohono's face. "Good memory. Good ear for Apache." "Good teacher," Sarah countered. That night, before retiring to their respective sleeping areas, they added to the calendar Sarah had created, marking off the first full day of their language exchange. The simple ritual established a shared acknowledgement of their time together, a period increasingly defined not by imprisonment or obligation, but by mutual discovery. Outside, the storm raged on, a force of nature that had thrown their disparate lives into unexpected convergence. Inside, words and meanings flowed between them, creating a fragile bridge across a divide far greater than the physical distance between settlement and mountain. On the fourth day, the storm finally released its grip on the mountain. Weak sunlight filtered through the dwelling's entrance as Tohono pulled aside the covering, allowing fresh air to sweep away the lingering smoke and mustiness. "Come," he said to Sarah, offering his arm for support. "See world after storm." Sarah hobbled outside with his assistance, her injured ankle still unable to bear full weight. The transformation was breathtaking. What had been obscured by rain and darkness now revealed itself in majestic clarity. Sweeping vistas of rugged peaks, valleys lush with pine and juniper, distant mesas glowing amber in the morning light. "It's beautiful," she breathed, the words inadequate to express the grandeur before her. "Shil Dayain," Tohono said softly. "Sacred mountains." They settled on a flat rock outside the dwelling, Sarah's journal open between them. Over the past days, its pages had filled with vocabulary lists, crude drawings, and increasingly complex language exercises. Today, Tohono had suggested a different approach to their learning. "Draw land," he instructed, handing her the charcoal. "How you see." Sarah sketched carefully, the mountain range, the settlement valley below, the winding trail she had attempted to follow. She labeled features with both English and Apache words they had learned together: river, to, forest, sin, mountain, zil. When she finished, Tohono studied her drawing with interest. "Map good, but not how Apache see land." He took the charcoal and turned to a fresh page. His drawing began not with boundaries or paths but with a central point, his dwelling, from which radiated relationships rather than distances. "Here, good hunting," he explained, marking an area to the north. "Here, medicine plants grow. Here, bad spirits dwell. Never go night." Each location was defined by its meaning, its story, rather than its physical position. "You see land differently than white people," Sarah observed. "White people own land," Tohono replied. "Apache belongs to land." This fundamental difference in worldview led to a deeper conversation than their previous exchanges. As the sun climbed higher, warming the rock beneath them, Sarah found herself describing Boston, its crowded streets, brick buildings, and social hierarchies. "Women there, they have certain roles, certain expectations," she explained. "Teaching is one of the few respectable professions open to us. Even then, most are expected to give it up upon marriage." "Why you come west?" Tohono asked. "Far from your people." Sarah considered the question. "I wanted something real. Boston life felt like playing a part in someone else's story. I thought out here I might write my own." Tohono nodded slowly. "Same reason I leave reservation. Government writes Apache story now. Bad ending." His words opened a floodgate. For the first time, Tohono spoke at length about the reservation system, the forced relocation of his people, the broken treaties, the systematic dismantling of Apache culture. Children taken to schools, Apache language forbidden, medicine men imprisoned, must worship white man's god. His voice remained level, but anger smoldered beneath the calm recitation. "Many die, from sickness, from hunger, some from heartbreak." Sarah listened in growing horror. She had read newspaper accounts of Indian policy, of course, but those sterile reports bore little resemblance to Tohono's first-hand testimony. "My father was great warrior," he continued, "fought many years against blue coats. When surrender came, he walked to reservation with head high. 1 year later, dead. Not from bullet, from shame." "And your mother?" Sarah asked softly. "Died before. Soldiers attacked our camp." The painful memory was evident in his tightened jaw. "I was 14 winters. I'm so sorry." The words felt hollow against such profound loss. "Your government speaks of civilization," Tohono said, his English precise and cutting. "Civilization is taking children from mothers. Civilization is starving people who lived here since beginning of time. Civilization is—" He stopped abruptly, visibly mastering his emotion. After a moment of weighted silence, Sarah spoke. "My father died in your people's war too. He was a Union officer sent west after the Civil War. I was 12 when we received word." Tohono's gaze softened slightly. "Children without fathers. This we share." The simple acknowledgement of their common loss created a bridge across the historical chasm between them. Sarah found herself telling him about her mother's subsequent struggle, her own education at a women's college, her decision to teach. "My mother wanted me to marry a banker's son," she said with a small smile. When I took the position out west instead, she predicted disaster. Sarah gestured ruefully at her injured ankle. Perhaps she wasn't entirely wrong. Unexpectedly, Tohono laughed. A short, rusty sound, as if long and used. Mothers often write. Their conversation continued through the morning, personal histories unfolding against the backdrop of larger historical forces. Sarah learned of Tohono's training as a warrior, his growing disillusionment with reservation life, his eventual decision to return to the mountains of his ancestors. "Most think I dead," he concluded. "Better that way. Don't you get lonely?" Sarah asked. Tohono gazed across the vast landscape. Mountains speak. Animals speak. Ancestors speak. He turned to her. "Loneliness is crowded room where no one hears your true voice." The profound observation silenced Sarah. She had felt precisely that kind of loneliness in Boston drawing rooms, in faculty meetings, even among the well-meaning settlers of Manzanita Springs. Yet here, with a man from a radically different world, she felt truly heard. The sun reached its zenith, prompting Tohono to suggest they return inside. As he helped Sarah to her feet, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that their exchange had moved beyond mere language to something deeper. That evening, by firelight, they continued adding to their peculiar map, a blended representation that incorporated both Sarah's measured distances and Tohono's storied places. The resulting document was neither entirely Apache nor entirely white, but something new, a shared vision of the world they both inhabited from vastly different perspectives. The rhythm of days in Tohono's mountain dwelling bore little resemblance to Sarah's regimented life in the settlement. Here, time moved according to natural cycles. The sun's position, hunger's prompting, the body's need for rest. No clocks dictated appointments, no bells summoned to meals or prayer. A week into her stay, Sarah found herself fully incorporated into this natural cadence. Her ankle, though still tender, had improved enough to allow limited mobility around the dwelling and its immediate surroundings. Each morning, she joined Tohono in his daily tasks with increasing competence. "Like this," he demonstrated, guiding her hands as she ground corn between two stones. "Even pressure. Let weight do work." The physical proximity no longer caused either of them discomfort. Their bodies had learned to navigate the small space with unconscious accommodation, stepping aside, reaching around, anticipating movement. The dance of shared domesticity created its own silent language. They prepared meals together in a cooking pot that had become the center of culinary experiments. Sarah contributed techniques from her Eastern upbringing while Tohono provided knowledge of local ingredients. The resulting dishes reflected their blended approach, familiar yet novel, like the relationship developing between the cook and teacher. "What is this called?" Sarah asked, stirring a savory stew of rabbit meat and wild onions. Tohono considered. "No name. New thing." After a thoughtful pause, he added, "Needs both Apache and English word." "Stewhazo," Sarah suggested, combining the English term with the Apache word for harmony she had recently learned. Tohono's mouth curved in a rare smile. "Good name. Good taste." Their language exchange continued daily, growing more sophisticated as Sarah's Apache vocabulary expanded and Tohono's English became more fluid. They had progressed beyond simple nouns to complex concepts, discussing dreams, beliefs, memories. The journal that had begun as a rudimentary word list now contained stories, observations, even simple poems translated between languages. One afternoon, while resting outside the dwelling, Sarah noticed Tohono watching her with unusual intensity. "What is it?" she asked. "Your hair," he replied. "In sunlight, color of autumn oak leaves." The unexpected poetry of his observation caught her off guard. "Thank you," she said softly. "Apache see beauty in nature," he explained. "Your hair natural, not like white women in settlement. They wear false things." Sarah laughed. "Hairpieces?" "Yes. Fashion often prizes artifice over nature. Why make beautiful thing less beautiful?" The simple question penetrated years of conditioning. Why indeed had she spent so much of her life conforming to arbitrary standards that often diminished rather than enhanced natural beauty? Here in the mountains, Sarah had abandoned her corset, worn her hair in simple braids, and allowed the sun to freckle her normally sheltered skin. She felt more herself than she had in years. In Boston, a woman with skin darkened by the sun would be considered unfortunate, she told Tohono. Here I find I don't care. Sun honors skin it touches, he said simply. These philosophical exchanges peppered their practical activities. While gathering firewood, they discussed how Apache and white cultures viewed mankind's relationship with nature. While repairing a tear in Sarah's dress, they compared beliefs about gender roles and responsibilities. Apache women strong, Tohono explained. Own homes, choose husbands, can divorce if man lazy or cruel. Have voice in council. Sarah shook her head ruefully. White women are still fighting for the right to vote. Many men believe our minds too delicate for politics or business. Foolish men, Tohono commented, waste half tribe's wisdom. In the evenings, their lessons often gave way to storytelling. Tohono shared Apache creation myths and trickster tales, while Sarah recounted Shakespeare's plays and Greek legends. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, Tohono carving while Sarah wrote in her journal. During one such evening, the quiet was broken by an unexpected sound. Tohono humming softly as he worked on a new carving. The melody, haunting and unfamiliar, drew Sarah's attention. That's beautiful, she said. What is it? Medicine song, he replied. For healing. He gestured toward her ankle. Would you teach me? Tohono hesitated. Sacred songs? Not usually for outsiders. Sarah nodded, accepting the boundary. But after a thoughtful moment, Tohono continued. But you not same as other white people. He set aside his carving. I teach simple healing song. For small hurts only. The lesson that followed transcended their previous exchanges. Tohono taught not just the melody and words, but the proper breath, the internal focus, the spiritual intention behind the song. Sarah struggled with the unfamiliar sounds, but her earnest effort seemed to please him. Again, he encouraged. Feel words here. He touched his chest. When she finally reproduced the song to his satisfaction, something shifted in his expression. A new respect, perhaps even pride. Good, he said. You have Apache heart under white skin. The compliment warmed her more than any conventional flattery ever had. That night, as she lay in her bed of furs, Sarah realized how profoundly her perspective had changed in just a week. The settlement that had been her destination now seemed distant not just in miles but in relevance. Her concerns about curriculum and proper teaching methods had been replaced by more fundamental questions about language, culture, and belonging. Most troubling was the realization that her time here was limited. Her ankle improved daily. Soon she would have no physical reason to remain. The settlement would be expecting her return, likely organizing search parties, perhaps even contacting authorities. The thought of leaving the mountain, of leaving Tohono, created an unexpected ache that had nothing to do with her injured ankle. The morning dawned clear and cool, with the crisp edge of approaching autumn sharpening the mountain air. Sarah stood outside the dwelling, testing her weight on her injured ankle. The swelling had subsided considerably, and though tenderness remained, she could walk with only a slight limp. Tohono emerged from the dwelling carrying 2 water skins and a small pack. He observed her experimental steps with a critical ankle stronger, he noted. Ready for short journey. Sarah looked up in surprise. Journey? Where are we going? Hunting, he replied simply. Food stores low. Winter coming. He handed her a sturdy walking stick he had carved from oak. Use this. We go slow. The prospect both excited and intimidated Sarah. She had never ventured far from the dwelling since her arrival, and certainly never participated in hunting. But curiosity and a desire to prove her usefulness overcame her hesitation. What will we be hunting? She asked as she followed him along a narrow path leading higher into the mountains. Rabbit, maybe grouse. Tohono moved with the silent grace that still amazed her, despite his powerful build. Big game for winter. Today, small hunt. Test your ankle.
Chach Bashiks.
He carried his hunting knife at his belt and a compact bow slung across his back. At his side hung a smaller knife in a decorated sheath. As they walked, he removed this and presented it to Sarah. For you, he said. Every hunter needs blade. Sarah accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity. The knife was beautifully crafted, its handle wrapped in dyed leather with intricate beadwork. The blade, though smaller than Tohono's, looked wickedly sharp. It's beautiful, she said, testing its weight in her hand. Did you make this? Tohono nodded. Many years ago. For. He hesitated. For someone who never used it. Something in his tone discouraged further questions. Sarah secured the knife to her belt, feeling oddly ceremonial, as if she'd been granted entry into a select fraternity. The path wound steadily upward, sometimes barely visible except to Tohono's practiced eye. He set a pace that challenged Sarah's recovering ankle without overtaxing it, pausing occasionally to point out plants of medicinal or nutritional value. This for fever, he explained, indicating a small flowering herb. This for stomach pain. This deadly, never touch. Sarah absorbed the information eagerly, recognizing that such knowledge could mean the difference between survival and disaster in this unforgiving environment. When Tohono demonstrated how to find water by reading subtle signs in the landscape, she practiced until she could identify the indicators herself. 2 hours into their journey, they reached a small meadow nestled between rocky outcroppings. Tohono signaled for silence, then crouched low, gesturing for Sarah to do the same. He pointed toward a patch of grasses where subtle movement betrayed the presence of small game. With breathtaking fluidity, he knocked an arrow and drew his bow in one smooth motion. The arrow flew true, and a moment later he was retrieving a plump rabbit from the grass. Clean kill, Sarah observed, surprised at her own lack of squeamishness. The practical reality of food procurement felt honest in a way that purchasing neatly butchered meat at a Boston market never had. Tohono nodded approval at her matter-of-fact reaction. Now you try. Sarah's eyes widened. I can't shoot like that. Not bow, he clarified. Snare. He demonstrated how to create a simple trap using materials from the environment. Hunting, not always chasing. Sometimes waiting, knowing where animal will go. Under his guidance, Sarah set her first snare. The process required patience and attention to detail, qualities she possessed in abundance as a teacher. When they returned an hour later to find a rabbit caught in her trap, she felt an unexpected surge of primitive pride. The moment of triumph was short-lived. As Tohono showed her how to humanely dispatch and dress the rabbit, a low growl froze them both in place. Mountain lion, Tohono whispered, slowly rising to his full height. Behind rock. Do not run. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood, fighting every instinct to flee. The mountain lion emerged from behind a boulder 30 feet away, a magnificent tawny predator regarding them with cold assessment. Back away slowly, Tohono instructed, his voice calm despite the danger. Keep eyes on cat. Show no fear. They retreated with measured steps. The mountain lion watched, tail twitching, seemingly calculating whether they represented prey, threat, or neither. When Tohono quietly drew his knife, Sarah followed suit, though she doubted her small blade would offer much protection against such a creature. The standoff stretched for interminable seconds. Then, with deliberate nonchalance, the mountain lion turned and padded away, disappearing into the rocks as silently as it had appeared. Only when it was gone did Sarah realize she'd been holding her breath. A small sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. You did well, Tohono said, genuine respect in his voice. No panic. Steady hand. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage, not absence of fear, he replied. Acting despite fear. They gathered their hard-won game and began the journey back to the dwelling. The encounter with the mountain lion had formed a new bond between them, the shared experience of facing danger together. As they descended, Sarah noticed Tohono watching her with a speculative expression. What is it? She asked. You belong to mountains more than settlement, he observed. Learn quick. Move quiet now. See with hunter eyes. The assessment pleased her more than it should have. I had a good teacher. That evening, they prepared a meal from their successful hunt, rabbit stew enriched with wild onions and the last of Tohono's dried corn. As they ate by firelight, the conversation turned to the day's adventures and the lessons learned. The knife you gave me, Sarah ventured. You said it was made for someone who never used it. May I ask who? Tohono was silent for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. My sister, he said. She was to become hunter like me, before soldiers came. The simple statement contained volumes of loss. Sarah reached across the space between them and briefly touched his hand, the first time she had initiated such contact. Tohono didn't pull away. She would be honored that it's being used now, Sarah said softly. Later, as she prepared for sleep, Sarah found herself running her fingers over the beadwork on the knife's sheath. The gift represented more than a practical tool. It was an acknowledgement of her place in Tohono's world, no longer an intruder, but someone worthy of carrying a piece of his history. The firelight cast dancing shadows across the dwelling's interior as Sarah traced her finger along a line of text in her journal. Across from her, Tohono followed the movement with intense concentration. The sky is clear tonight, he read haltingly, sounding out each word with careful precision. Stars shine like eyes of ancestors. Perfect, Sarah praised, her teacher's heart swelling with pride at his progress. Just 2 weeks into their literacy lessons, Tohono was already reading. Simple sentences. His intelligence and determination made him an ideal student, grasping concepts that had taken her settlement pupils months to master. My words, Tohono asked, pointing to the Apache phrase she had written beneath the English sentence, her own attempt at his language. Sarah recited the Apache translation, her pronunciation still imperfect but improving daily. Tohono nodded approvingly. Good. But this sound, he demonstrated a particularly difficult guttural, comes from deeper. He placed his hand lightly on her throat. Feel here when I speak. The casual intimacy of the gesture no longer startled Sarah. Their physical boundaries had gradually dissolved through daily proximity and necessity. Now, Tohono's touch as he corrected her pronunciation felt natural, even comforting. Better, he said when she successfully produced the sound. You learn fast for white person. Sarah laughed at the backhanded compliment. And you write beautifully for someone who claims to prefer speaking. She gestured to his practice page, where he had copied out a passage from her journal in meticulous script. Their evening routine had evolved organically, reading and writing lessons followed by cultural exchange that went far beyond vocabulary. Tonight, Tohono had promised to teach Sarah a traditional craft. He reached for a small bundle of thin leather strips, sinew, and colorful beads. Wristband, he explained, protection for bow arm. Also, he searched for the right word, symbol of belonging. Sarah watched intently as he demonstrated the basic weaving pattern, his large hands surprisingly dexterous with the delicate materials. After establishing the foundation, he guided her through the process of adding beads in a specific arrangement. Blue for sky, he explained as she worked a turquoise bead into the pattern. White for clouds. Red for blood. Sarah guessed, thinking of the symbolism she might expect. Tohono shook his head. For joy, he corrected. Not all red means violence. The gentle rebuke reminded Sarah how often her cultural assumptions led her astray. What does this pattern represent? She asked, indicating the emerging design. Journey, Tohono replied. Path that changes traveler. As her fingers worked the unfamiliar materials, Sarah reflected on how profoundly her own journey had already changed her. The woman who had set out for a day's hike from Manzanita Springs seemed a distant memory, naive, constrained by conventions she hadn't even recognized as arbitrary. In your culture, she asked, securing another bead, how do people know who they are? What gives them identity? Tohono considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. First, family clan. Then what person does well, hunter, healer, storyteller. Also, how person treats others, honors traditions. He watched her weaving for a moment before asking, "In white world, money," Sarah replied with a rueful smile. "Family name. In Boston, who your grandfather was matters more than who you are. For women, identity often comes through husbands or fathers." "Strange way," Tohono commented. "Person not own self." Exactly. The simple validation of her long-held discomfort with societal expectations warmed Sarah more than the fire. As the bracelet took shape under her fingers, Tohono shared stories of Apache ceremonies, the sunrise rituals, the coming-of-age traditions, the sacred dances that maintained harmony between people and land. In return, Sarah described the social seasons of Boston, the religious observances, the elaborate courtship customs that seemed increasingly absurd when explained to someone outside her culture. Women wear special clothes, attend parties where they can only speak to men who are properly introduced, and dance prescribed steps at a proper distance, she explained. "How man and woman know if good match?" Tohono asked, genuinely puzzled. "They don't really," Sarah admitted. "That's why so many marriages are unhappy." "Apache way better," Tohono stated with rare certainty. "Young people spend time together, work together. See if minds and hearts match before commitment." The practical wisdom of this approach struck Sarah forcefully. How different might her own life have been if she'd been allowed to truly know the banker's son her mother had favored. To work alongside him, face challenges with him, discover his character beyond ballroom manners. As if reading her thoughts, Tohono asked, "You never found man with matching heart?" The personal question might have seemed intrusive weeks ago. Now it felt natural. "No," Sarah answered honestly. "I've never met a man who wanted me as I am, rather than as society dictates a wife should be." Something flickered in Tohono's dark eyes, an expression too complex to decipher in the firelight. Before he could respond, Sarah held up the completed bracelet. "Is this right?" Tohono examined her work, his fingers brushing hers as he turned the band to inspect the pattern. "Good first attempt," he pronounced. "Strong weave. Pattern tells true story." "What story does it tell?" "New path. Two streams joining." He secured the bracelet around her wrist, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Fits well. Belongs there." Sarah studied the colorful band against her skin, a visible symbol of her time in the mountains, of skills learned and boundaries crossed. "Thank you for teaching me." "Thank you for learning," Tohono replied simply. That night, as Sarah lay beneath her buffalo robe, she found herself repeatedly touching the bracelet, its texture reassuringly solid beneath her fingertips. Unlike her gold locket or pearl earrings, symbols of a world increasingly remote, this humble creation carried meaning she had helped craft with her own hands. Like the language they were building between them, the bracelet represented something neither fully Apache nor fully white, but uniquely theirs, a tangible manifestation of the connection forming between two people from worlds that had never truly understood each other. Sarah stood at the edge of the plateau, gazing down at the distant smudge that was Manzanita Springs. The settlement appeared impossibly small from this vantage point, a fragile human construct against the vast indifference of the landscape. Somewhere in that cluster of buildings, her students would be continuing their lessons under Mrs. Abernathy's supervision, perhaps wondering what had become of their teacher. "You see settlement clearly now," Tohono observed, joining her at the overlook. "Ankle strong enough for journey down." The statement hung in the air between them, factual yet weighted with unspoken implications. After nearly 3 weeks in the mountains, Sarah's injury had healed completely. The physical reason for her extended stay no longer existed. She reached into her pocket, withdrawing the small silver pocket watch her father had given her before his departure west. Its face had been a constant companion throughout her life, marking lessons, appointments, the measured progression of civilized existence. Now, she noticed with a strange detachment, it had stopped. "My watch has died," she said, holding it up to catch the sunlight. Tohono examined it curiously. "Can fix?" "Probably. It needs winding, or perhaps cleaning." She returned it to her pocket with no urgency. It doesn't seem important anymore. They stood in companionable silence, watching an eagle circle lazily in the thermals rising from the valley. The past weeks had transformed their relationship in ways neither could have anticipated. From reluctant host and unwelcome guest, they had become, what? Teacher and student? Friends? Something for which neither language seemed to have an adequate term. The settlement will be concerned, Sarah finally said, giving voice to the practical reality they had both been avoiding. They may have sent word to authorities. Search parties could be combing these mountains even now. Yes, Tohono acknowledged. Dangerous for me if searchers come. More dangerous if soldiers. The implication was clear. Her continued absence might eventually bring armed men into these mountains. Men who would view a solitary Apache warrior with suspicion at best, lethal intent at worst. I should return, Sarah said, the words heavy on her tongue. Yes, Tohono agreed, his face impassive. Should, but neither moved from the overlook. Instead, Tohono asked, what waits for you there? The question penetrated to the heart of Sarah's growing dilemma. What indeed? A small room above the general store. Children who viewed her with varying degrees of curiosity and resentment. Settlers who tolerated her Eastern ways with thinly veiled condescension. Teaching methods that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for the realities of frontier life. My position, she answered finally. My responsibility to the children. Only duty? Tohono pressed. No joy? No belonging? Sarah considered honestly. Had she felt truly connected to the settlement in the 6 weeks before her mountain sojourn? Had she formed meaningful relationships? Found purpose beyond the basic execution of her teaching duties? I thought I belonged there more than in Boston, she admitted. But now I'm not certain I belong there at all. The confession lingered between them, both liberating and frightening in its implications. Where do you belong, Sarah Keller? Tohono asked softly. She looked at him then, really looked, at the strength and dignity in his bearing, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the hints of humor and pain that comprised his complex humanity. In his presence, she felt more herself than she ever had in Boston drawing rooms or frontier schoolhouses. I don't know any more, she whispered. Tohono nodded, as if her confusion was both expected and reasonable. Decision not easy. 2 paths. He gestured toward the settlement, then back toward his mountain dwelling. Each path has price. The truth of his statement settled heavily in Sarah's chest. Remaining in the mountains with Tohono would mean abandoning her profession, her place in white society, perhaps even her identity as she had understood it. Returning to the settlement would mean leaving behind. What? A man who had shown her a different way of being in the world? A freedom she had only begun to taste? What would happen if I stayed? She asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider its boldness. Tohono's expression remained carefully neutral. For how long? I don't know. Longer. Perhaps. She couldn't bring herself to articulate the nebulous possibilities forming in her mind. Life here not easy, Tohono said after a thoughtful pause. Winter comes soon. Hard season. Dangerous for those not born to mountains. You could teach me to survive, Sarah suggested. As you've taught me other things. Could teach survival, he acknowledged. Cannot teach belonging. Apache ways not white ways. His gaze intensified. Some in tribe would not accept white woman. Many whites would hunt man who takes teacher from settlement. The stark reality of what she was contemplating struck Sarah forcefully. This wasn't a romantic adventure from one of her books. It was a choice with profound, life-altering consequences. I need time, she said finally, to think clearly. Tohono nodded. Wise. He gestured back toward the dwelling. Stay little longer. Make decision with clear mind, not fear or other feelings. As they walked back in silence, Sarah realized that the decision before her was not truly about a location, settlement versus mountain, but about identity itself. Who was she becoming in this unfamiliar territory, and who did she wish to be? That night, she placed her stopped pocket watch on a small shelf near her sleeping area. Its stillness seemed appropriate somehow, a metaphor for this suspended moment between lives, where time as she had always measured it had temporarily ceased to flow. The crack of a distant rifle shot shattered the morning stillness. Sarah froze midway through gathering kindling, her arms full of dry branches. Tohono, who had been checking his snare line along the ridge above, materialized beside her with alarming suddenness. "Inside," he commanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "Now." They hurried to the dwelling, abandoning the kindling just outside the entrance. Once inside, Tohono moved with practiced efficiency, gathering essential items into a small pack. "Hunters?" Sarah asked, her heart racing at his evident alarm. Tohono shook his head grimly. "Wrong season for white hunters. Wrong guns." He pulled aside a woven mat to reveal a small opening in the rear wall of the dwelling, an escape route she hadn't known existed. Maybe search party, maybe soldiers. The rifle shot had come from the western slope, the opposite direction from the settlement. Tohono's territory extended far beyond what Sarah had explored during her stay, and clearly, someone had encroached upon it. "What should we do?" she asked, instinctively keeping her voice low. "Wait, listen." Tohono extinguished the morning fire, plunging the dwelling into shadow. "If they pass by, good. If they come closer." He didn't finish the thought, but his hand moved to the knife at his belt. Sarah's mind raced with implications. A search party would be looking for her, a missing schoolteacher presumed injured or lost. But how would they have ventured so far from the settlement, approaching from the wrong direction entirely? "Could it be Apache?" she whispered. "No Apache uses rifle if hunting. Too loud." Tohono moved to the entrance, listening intently. "Only use guns for war." The ominous statement hung in the air as they waited in tense silence. After several minutes, Tohono gestured for Sarah to stay put and slipped outside with silent efficiency. She remained frozen in place, straining to hear any sound beyond her own shallow breathing. When Tohono returned 15 minutes later, his expression was even more grave. "3 men," he reported. "2 with rifles. Army boots. Soldiers?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "Not in uniform, but military trained." He pointed west. "They camp by spring. 2 miles. Hunting something." His meaningful look made clear what or who he believed they sought. "Not me," Sarah said with certainty. "A search party would come from the east, from the settlement. Bounty hunters," Tohono concluded grimly. "Looking for renegade Apache." The term struck Sarah like a physical blow. In the newspapers, renegade inevitably preceded stories of violence, raids on settlements, or attacks on travelers. But Tohono had lived peacefully in these mountains for years, avoiding contact with whites rather than seeking conflict. "But you've done nothing," she protested. Tohono's bitter smile held centuries of injustice. "Existing where white man wants land is enough." Another distant shot punctuated his statement, closer this time. The hunters were moving in their direction. "They'll find us," Sarah realized aloud. The dwelling, though cleverly situated, wouldn't remain hidden from determined searchers with tracking skills. "What will they do if they discover you?" "Kill first. Questions later." Tohono's matter-of-fact tone somehow made the assessment more chilling. "Apache scalps still bring payment in some territories." Horror washed over Sarah as the brutal reality of frontier justice crystallized in her mind. The man before her, the complex, intelligent individual who had saved her life, taught her his language and shared his world, would be reduced to a trophy, a story to boast about in saloons. "We need to leave," she said decisively. Tohono raised an eyebrow at her use of "we," but didn't correct her. "Have hiding places, high caves, but..." He hesitated, studying her face. "Dangerous climb." "I can manage," Sarah insisted. "Different problem," Tohono said. "If hunters find white woman with Apache." He didn't need to complete the thought. The assumptions would be automatic and damning: abduction, captivity, unspeakable treatment. No explanation of her willing presence would be believed. "They mustn't find me at all, then," Sarah concluded. Tohono considered briefly, then moved to a storage niche and withdrew an item Sarah hadn't seen before, a rifle older than those carried by the intruders but well-maintained. He checked its loading mechanism with practiced hands. "Last choice," he said, noting her troubled expression. "First, we hide." A plan quickly formed. They would remove all evidence of Sarah's presence from the dwelling, then separate temporarily. Tohono would lead the hunters away from his home with false tracks, while Sarah remained hidden in a concealed cave higher on the mountain. Once the immediate threat passed, they would rendezvous at a predetermined location. As Sarah gathered her few possessions, reality struck her with stunning clarity. She was choosing Tohono's safety over making contact with people who might help her return to her position, to civilization. Not from fear or coercion, but from a profound sense that justice lay on his side of this equation. She tucked her journal securely in her dress pocket and folded the buffalo robe that had been her bed. Her stopped pocket watch she deliberately left on the shelf, a decoy that might suggest she had been there but was no longer. Tohono watched her preparations with unreadable eyes. "You could go to them," he said suddenly. "Safer for you. Tell story of injury, losing way. They take you back to settlement." The offer, a chance to return to her old life without the difficult journey or awkward explanations, hung in the air between them. For a fleeting moment, Sarah imagined the relief of resuming her teaching position, of sleeping in a proper bed, of conversing in her native tongue without constant effort. But the image dissolved as quickly as it formed. In its place stood the reality of the man before her, and the men who hunted him simply for existing. "No," she said firmly. "I'm staying with you." Something flickered in Tohono's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he wouldn't name. He nodded once, accepting her decision without further debate. "Then we go. Now." As they slipped from the dwelling into the concealing forest, Sarah realized she had just made a choice far more consequential than the philosophical deliberations of the previous day. Not with words or intentions, but with actions that couldn't be undone. The outside world had intruded on their sanctuary. Forcing her hand before her heart had fully resolved its conflict. Yet strangely, the decision brought clarity rather than regret. Whatever came next, she had chosen her path. The cave Tohono had chosen as their sanctuary perched near the summit of a jagged peak, invisible from below. Its narrow entrance, barely wide enough for Tohono's broad shoulders, opened into a surprisingly spacious chamber. Ancient handprints decorated one wall, silent testimony that they were not the first to seek refuge here. "Sacred place," Tohono explained as they settled inside, "where Apache warriors came for vision quests. Safe place." The climb had been arduous, testing Sarah's newly healed ankle and her determination, but the reward was undeniable. From the cave mouth, they could observe the valleys below while remaining unseen. By mid-afternoon, they had spotted the hunters methodically working their way along the western ridge, following what Sarah now knew were false tracks Tohono had left to lead them away from both his dwelling and their current hideout. As dusk settled over the mountains, the hunters made camp in a clearing far below. Their campfire appeared as a tiny orange pinprick in the gathering darkness. "Will they give up?" Sarah asked, accepting a strip of dried venison Tohono offered from their meager provisions. "Not tomorrow. Maybe next day." He settled beside her at the cave entrance. "Men like that proud don't admit defeat easily." Night fell completely, unveiling a spectacular canopy of stars. Without the competition of city lights or even the modest lamps of Manzanita Springs, the heavens revealed their full glory, countless points of light spanning the darkness in dazzling profusion. "I've never seen so many stars," Sarah murmured, tilting her head back to take in the panorama. "Apache believe stars are ancestors," Tohono said, his voice softening. "Watching over living, guiding lost ones home. That's beautiful." Sarah found herself instinctively leaning closer to him, drawn by the warmth of his presence against the mountain's night chill. "What do you believe?" The personal question hung between them. Throughout their weeks together, Tohono had shared tribal beliefs and customs, but rarely his own spiritual convictions. "I believe," he began slowly, "world has power beyond what eyes see. Whether ancestor spirits or something else, cannot say for certain. His gaze remained fixed on the brilliant sky. But feel connection, to land, to sky, to life before and after mine. The thoughtful response revealed a mind that questioned while still honoring tradition, a philosophical nature Sarah had come to deeply respect. "And you?" he asked. "What does teacher believe?" Sarah considered carefully. "I was raised Christian, taught that God created everything with divine purpose. But lately," she paused, struggling to articulate the evolution of her thoughts. "I find it harder to believe in a deity who values one people's ways above all others. The God I was taught about seems too small for this sky, this world." Tohono nodded, accepting her spiritual uncertainty without judgment. They sat in companionable silence, watching a meteor streak briefly across the darkness. "Why did you really come west, Sarah Keller?" Tohono asked suddenly, using her full name as he did when asking serious questions. The query caught her off guard. She had given him the simple version, seeking purpose, escaping Boston's confines, but never the complete truth. "I was running away," she admitted, "not just from societal expectations, but from myself. In Boston, I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, bitter, resigned, conventional despite my protests to the contrary." She drew a deep breath. "I thought changing my location would change who I was becoming. I didn't realize that." "Geographic cure," Tohono supplied when she faltered. "Apache understand this. Some think new hunting ground solves old spirit problems." "Yes, exactly." Sarah smiled at his perfect comprehension. "And you? Why did you really leave the reservation? Was it only to escape the restrictions?" Tohono was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "I had wife," he said simply. "On reservation." The revelation stunned Sarah into silence. In all their conversations, he had never mentioned a spouse. "What happened?" she asked gently. "Government agent took liking to her. Made demands." His jaw tightened. "When she refused, he had me arrested. False charges. While I was held, he went to our home." The implications were clear enough. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to cover his where it rested on the stone between them. "She took own life next day," Tohono continued, his voice flat with old pain. "Apache way, when dishonor cannot be survived with dignity." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, the words hopelessly inadequate against such tragedy. "I was released when other Apache witnessed for me. That night, I went to agent's quarters." Tohono's eyes reflected the starlight, hard as obsidian. "I did not kill him. Wanted to. Had knife at his throat. But thought of her. What she would want." He exhaled slowly. "Left him marked. Left reservation. Came to ancestors' mountains." The confession explained so much. His solitude, his distrust of whites, the shadows that sometimes darkened his expression. "You honored her by choosing a better path," Sarah said softly. "Try to. Not always succeed." He turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining with gentle intention. Long time felt dead inside, like walking corpse. His eyes met hers directly, until lost teacher stumbled to my door. The simple declaration stole Sarah's breath. In the crystalline mountain air, beneath the ancestral stars, truth seemed the only possible currency between them. "I've never felt more alive than these weeks with you," she confessed. "Or more myself." Their hands remained joined as the night deepened around them. No further words were needed. Their connected fingers, their shared gaze under the infinite sky spoke volumes that language, in any tongue, could not adequately express. The hunter's distant campfire eventually died to embers far below, but neither Sarah nor Tohono noticed its passing. They had found, in this precarious sanctuary, something both had believed lost forever, the possibility of a heart's resurrection. Dawn brought a disquieting change in the weather. The previous day's clear skies had given way to ominous clouds building over the western peaks. A fitful wind carried the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Tohono stood at the cave entrance, reading the approaching storm with experienced eyes. "Bad one coming," he observed grimly. "Not safe to stay here." Sarah joined him, noting how the valley below had disappeared beneath a rolling bank of fog. "The hunters left before sunrise, moving north." Tohono gestured toward a barely visible trail of dust on the distant ridge. "Storm will erase tracks. Good time to return home." They gathered their few possessions quickly. The descent proved more treacherous than the climb, with loose stones slick from the gathering moisture. Twice Sarah slipped, saved from serious injury only by Tohono's steadying hand. By the time they reached the lower slopes, the wind had strengthened to a constant howl, bending the pines and stripping autumn leaves from the aspens in swirling copper eddies. "Hurry!" Tohono urged as the first heavy raindrops struck. "Storm moves fast." They reached the dwelling just as the deluge began in earnest. Inside, Tohono immediately set about rekindling the fire that had been cold for 2 days. Sarah wrung water from her hair, relieved to be back in what had improbably become a place of safety and comfort. But something felt different. Sarah realized with a start that the roof had been disturbed during their absence. A section above the sleeping area sagged ominously, allowing water to drip onto the buffalo robes below. "The hunters?" she asked, pointing to the damage. Tohono examined the compromised structure and shook his head. "No. Storm damage before. Getting worse." He reached for a supporting pole near the central fire pit. "Need to brace before collapse." The repair would require their combined efforts. Under Tohono's direction, Sarah helped position the main support pole while he climbed nimbly onto a ledge to reach the damaged section. Outside, the storm's intensity increased, wind screaming through the mountain passes like a living entity seeking entrance. "Hold steady," Tohono called over the noise, working quickly to secure the weakened section with rawhide lashings. The dwelling shuddered under a particularly violent gust. "Almost." A deafening crack interrupted his words as a section of the roof suddenly gave way. Tohono's reflexes saved him from the full impact, but he couldn't avoid a falling beam that struck his shoulder. He dropped heavily to the floor, rolling to avoid further debris. "Tohono!" Sarah abandoned her post and rushed to his side. He was already pushing himself upright, grimacing but apparently without serious injury. "Back to pole," he directed, waving her away. "Must secure or lose whole roof." Rain now poured through the gaping hole, quickly turning the packed earth floor to mud. Working frantically, they managed to position a second support beam beneath the compromised section. The temporary repair wouldn't restore the roof, but it would prevent further collapse. "Fire dying," Tohono observed once the immediate crisis had passed. Indeed, the central fire pit now hissed with rainwater, its embers rapidly cooling to gray ash. Sarah glanced around the increasingly wet interior. "What should we do?" "Move things to dry corner." Tohono pointed to the storage area, which remained relatively protected. "Make small space. Conserve heat." They worked methodically, salvaging what they could from the encroaching water. Tohono's few possessions, Sarah's journal, the precious medicine bundle, and essential supplies were relocated to the driest corner. Furs and blankets created a makeshift shelter within the shelter, a final defense against the elements that had breached their sanctuary. As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, its fury intensified. Huddled in their diminished space, they shared a cold meal of dried meat and berries, the best they could manage without fire. "I'm sorry about your home," Sarah said, watching Tohono's face in the dim light filtering through the damaged roof. He shrugged, though the movement clearly caused him pain. "Can rebuild. Always have." Sarah noticed him suppressing a shiver. Despite his stoicism, the cold and damp were affecting him. Concerned, she placed a hand on his forehead. "You're burning up?" she exclaimed, alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin. "Just tired," he dismissed, but the unusual brightness of his eyes belied the claim. "Let me see your shoulder," Sarah insisted. Reluctantly, Tohono allowed her to examine where the beam had struck. An angry red gash ran across his shoulder blade, the skin around it hot and swollen. The wound itself wasn't severe, but the early signs of infection were unmistakable. "You need medicine," Sarah said firmly. "Where's your fever bark?" "Medicine bundle. Red pouch." Sarah retrieved the item, recognizing the bitter-smelling bark they had used for her respiratory symptoms weeks before. Following Tohono's increasingly labored instructions, she prepared a tea using rainwater collected from the roof leak. "Drink all," she urged, supporting his head as he consumed the medicinal brew. As the night deepened, Tohono's condition deteriorated. The fever rose despite the medicine, bringing periods of restless sleep interrupted by mumbled Apache phrases Sarah couldn't understand. She bathed his face with cool rainwater, applied healing salve to the wound, and maintained a constant vigil. During one lucid moment, Tohono's eyes found hers with surprising clarity. "Sarah," he said, using her first name with unusual directness. "If fever worsens, Apache burial customs." "Stop," she interrupted firmly. "You're going to recover. I won't hear otherwise." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." "Yes," she agreed, taking his hand in both of hers. "Exactly as stubborn as you." Throughout the endless night, as the storm raged around their damaged shelter, Sarah held Tohono's hand, speaking softly in a mixture of English and the Apache words he had taught her. She told stories of Boston, sang half-remembered hymns from childhood, and when those ran out, simply repeated the most important phrase she knew. "Te ho agitigo," she whispered, the Apache expression he had taught her for perseverance, for never giving up. Te ho agitigo. Whether he heard in his fever dreams, she couldn't know. But the words became a mantra for them both, a defiant assertion that neither storm nor illness would conquer what they had found together on this unforgiving mountain. Morning arrived with grudging light filtering through the damaged roof. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a sodden dwelling and an eerie silence. Sarah, who had maintained her vigil through the night, checked Tohono's forehead for the 100th time. The raging fever had broken sometime before dawn, leaving him in an exhausted but restful sleep. She eased her stiff body from their cramped corner, careful not to disturb him. The dwelling's interior presented a disheartening sight: mud-soaked furs, scattered possessions, and the collapsed section of roof admitting a rectangle of gray sky. Yet the primary emotion Sarah felt was not despair but profound relief. Tohono would recover. Everything else was secondary. Outside, the mountain world glistened with raindrops, every surface washed clean by the storm's fury. Sarah gathered kindling from a protected hollow beneath a nearby overhang and set about the challenging task of starting a fire with damp materials. Tohono had taught her well. Within half an hour, she had coaxed a small flame into existence. She was heating water for tea when a soft sound alerted her to Tohono's awakening. He pushed himself to a sitting position, wincing slightly at the movement. "You should rest," Sarah admonished, hurrying to his side. "Sun up. Work to do." Despite his words, he accepted the cup of tea she offered, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "You stayed awake all night." It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded. "Your fever was dangerous." Tohono studied her face, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes, the tangled hair, the exhaustion evident in every line of her posture. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. "Thank you," he said simply. Those two words, weighted with genuine emotion, affected Sarah more profoundly than any elaborate expression of gratitude could have. Impulsively, she reached out to touch his cheek, allowing her fingers to linger against his skin, warm now with health rather than fever. "I was afraid," she admitted. Tohono covered her hand with his own, keeping it pressed to his face. The gesture, so intimate and unguarded, stood in stark contrast to the careful distance he had maintained during most of their time together. "Sarah," he began, then paused, searching for words in a language not his own. "Last night, in fever dreams, heard your voice, calling me back. She smiled softly. I can be quite insistent. Yes, stubborn teacher. His thumb traced a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. But more than teacher now. The simple statement acknowledged the transformation neither had fully articulated. Sarah felt a curious lightness in her chest, as if something long constricted had finally been released. What am I to you, Tohono? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He considered carefully, his dark eyes never leaving hers. In Apache there is word. Sichai Binigan means, one who belongs with my soul. He hesitated. Not same as white man's love. Deeper, older, like mountains knowing sky. The poetry of his definition brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. No courtship declaration in Boston parlors had ever approached such simple profundity. And I? She asked. What am I to you? Everything that was missing, he answered without hesitation. Voice in silence. Warmth in cold. Future I thought died long ago. Sarah found herself speechless before such naked honesty. Instead of responding with words, she leaned forward and gently pressed her lips to his. A kiss as delicate and tentative as the new reality forming between them. When she drew back, Tohono's expression held wonder and questioning in equal measure. You understand what this means? He asked gravely. White woman, Apache man, no easy path. I understand better than you think, Sarah replied. I've had weeks to consider the implications, to weigh what I would gain against what I would lose. She looked around at the storm-damaged dwelling. I don't harbor romantic illusions about life here. It would be difficult, dangerous even. Yes, Tohono agreed. And your world? Settlement? Teaching? Sarah considered the question seriously, refusing to dismiss the life she had built before the mountain. I value teaching. I could teach still, perhaps differently, perhaps your people's children someday. As for the settlement, she thought of Manzanita Springs with its rigid social hierarchies, its fearful suspicion of the unfamiliar. It never truly felt like my world. Tohono's hand moved to a small leather pouch at his waist. From it, he withdrew a smooth stone, its surface painted with intricate designs in red, white, and black. Apache symbols interwoven with representations of items from Sarah's world. A book, a dwelling, a star pattern. Made this during nights you slept, he explained, placing it in her palm. Story stone. Our story. Sarah examined the delicate artwork, recognizing motifs they had developed together in their language exchange. The stone's cool weight in her hand felt like a tangible manifestation of what had grown between them. Solid, real, and uniquely their own. It's beautiful, she said softly. Not finished, Tohono noted. Story continues, if you wish it. The question beneath his statement hung in the air between them. Despite his declaration, he was offering her a choice. A return to her former life or a commitment to this uncertain, uncharted territory they had discovered together. Sarah closed her fingers around the stone, its edges pressing into her palm with reassuring solidity. I wish it, she said firmly. Whatever comes, I wish to face it with you. Relief and joy transformed Tohono's features, erasing years of solitude and caution in an instant. He gathered her gently into his arms, mindful of his healing wound, and held her as if she were something infinitely precious and unexpected. Outside, the sun had emerged fully from behind the storm clouds, casting golden light across the rain-washed mountain. Inside the damaged dwelling, two people from worlds that had never truly understood each other held fast to a truth they had discovered together. That belonging is not about place or people or even language, but about the recognition of one soul by another across all barriers of history and circumstance. The days following the storm were consumed with restoring Tohono's dwelling. Together they repaired the damaged roof, dried sodden possessions, and re-established the rhythms of daily life. Sarah found unexpected satisfaction in the physical labor, the tangible results of their efforts a stark contrast to the abstract rewards of teaching grammar and arithmetic. But even as they worked side by side, a new awareness colored their interactions. Hands lingered during the passing of tools. Glances held meaning beyond the immediate task. Conversations flowed more freely, punctuated by quiet moments of shared understanding that required no words at all. On the 5th day after the storm, as they collected firewood on the eastern slope, a distant sound froze them both mid-motion. Voices, Tohono confirmed, his body instantly alert. Many men, coming up main trail. Sarah strained to hear. At first, she detected only the mountain's ambient sounds. Wind in pine boughs, a jay's harsh call, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Then it came to her. The distinctive jingling of bridle hardware, the creak of saddle leather, men's voices raised in casual conversation. "A search party?" she whispered, though the speakers were still far beyond earshot. Tohono shook his head. Too organized, too confident. He gestured for her to follow him to a concealed vantage point among the rocks. Military patrol. From their hiding place, they soon confirmed his assessment. A column of 8 cavalrymen in blue uniforms made their way steadily up the trail, led by a grizzled sergeant. Behind them rode 2 civilians, one a lean, hard-faced man with a deputy's badge visible on his vest, the other dressed in the more formal attire of a government official. "Indian agent," Tohono murmured, his voice tight with controlled anger. "From reservation." Sarah's stomach clenched at the confirmation. Not random hunters or a simple search party, but a deliberate expedition with authority behind it. "Are they looking for you specifically?" "Maybe. Or any Apache off-reservation." His expression darkened. Agent recognizes chance for promotion when hostiles captured or killed. They watched in tense silence as the party continued its ascent. The men's voices carried occasionally on the breeze, fragments of conversation about trail conditions, complaints about rations, crude jokes. One phrase reached them with chilling clarity. "Schoolmarm's probably long dead, but the colonel wants every canyon searched anyway." Sarah and Tohono exchanged glances. The connection was clear now. The settlement had indeed organized a search for their missing teacher, which had eventually drawn military involvement. What had begun as concern for her welfare had transformed into an excuse for a systematic sweep of the mountains for any Apache living independently. "They're coming because of me?" Sarah whispered, horror and guilt washing over her. "Not your fault," Tohono countered firmly. "Excuse only. They want land. Apache gone." When the patrol disappeared around a bend in the trail, Tohono led Sarah swiftly back toward the dwelling. "Must prepare," he explained tersely. "They make camp at Lower Spring tonight. Continue search tomorrow." "How much time do we have?" "Day. Maybe less." His expression was grim but resolute. "Must decide now. The dwelling, so recently restored, would need to be abandoned." That much was clear to both of them. But the form of their departure, together or separately, remained unresolved. Inside, Tohono efficiently gathered essential supplies, weapons, tools, medicine bundle, minimal food. Sarah watched his practiced movements, the reality of their situation crystallizing with painful clarity. "They're searching for a missing white woman," she said slowly. "If I were to go to them voluntarily, explain that I was injured, lost, survived on my own, they would have no reason to continue hunting." Tohono's hands stilled. "You would return to settlement. Only long enough to resolve my affairs properly," Sarah clarified. "Give notice at the school. Collect my few possessions." She approached him, placing her hand on his arm. "Then I could leave openly of my own accord. No one would search for me." He studied her face. "Return here." "Not immediately. It would be too suspicious." Sarah had been considering the problem throughout their work on the dwelling. "I could travel to Tucson first, establish a new identity there, then return when the attention has faded." "Dangerous journey for woman alone," Tohono observed. "I'm stronger than I was a month ago." She smiled faintly. "A certain Apache warrior taught me well." Tohono resumed his preparations, his movements more measured now. "Different plan," he suggested. "I take you near patrol tomorrow. You emerge from woods. Tell story of being lost. Return to settlement." His dark eyes held hers intently. "I follow. Meet you there." Sarah's breath caught. You would come to the settlement? The risk. For you, he said simply. Risk worth taking. The selflessness of his offer struck Sarah profoundly. This man who had every reason to avoid white settlements was willing to enter one, to place himself in mortal danger for her sake. No, she said firmly. The danger is too great. You're known there. The children have been told stories about the wild Apache in the mountains. You would be recognized immediately. Then first plan better. Tohono nodded, accepting her reasoning. You go. Return when safe. Sarah took the story stone from her pocket, where she had carried it since he'd given it to her. We need something more concrete than hope. A specific plan. Tohono considered, then reached for a piece of charcoal. On a flattened section of hide, he drew a simple map. Spirit Canyon, he said, indicating a location several miles north of the settlement, where 3 stones stand like fingers reaching to sky. 1 month from today, at full moon. He looked up at her. I will wait 3 days. I'll be there, Sarah promised. The first day, the crude drawing represented their future. Uncertain, dependent on countless factors beyond their control, but intentional. Sarah committed the location to memory, then carefully folded the hide and tucked it into her journal. As evening approached, they prepared for their final night in the dwelling that had witnessed their unlikely convergence. Tomorrow would bring separation, risk, and a return to the world that had never understood either of them fully. But tonight remained theirs, a brief sanctuary in which to acknowledge both the pain of parting and the hope of reunion. I'm afraid, Sarah admitted as darkness fell, not of the patrol or the journey, but of the possibility that their fragile plan might fail, that circumstances beyond their control might prevent their reunion. Fear is shadow of strong feeling, Tohono replied, drawing her into his arms. Shows what matters most. In the dwelling's dim interior, with danger approaching and separation inevitable, they held each other with the quiet desperation of those who understand precisely what they stand to lose. The morning mist still clung to the valley when Sarah and Tohono said their goodbyes. No tears, no prolonged embraces. They had agreed that such indulgences would only make their separation more difficult. Instead, a simple exchange of promises. Spirit Canyon. Full moon. I will be waiting. I will come. Sarah carried only her journal, the story stone, and a small pack containing basic provisions. Tohono would shadow her until she reached the vicinity of the patrol, ensuring her safety before disappearing into the mountains. He knew better than any living soul. The plan unfolded with painful precision. By mid-morning, Sarah detected the sounds of the military camp breaking up for the day's search. Tohono squeezed her hand once, then melted into the forest as though he had never existed. Drawing a deep breath, Sarah deliberately scuffed her boots along the rocky ground, creating noise a skilled tracker would detect. Hello? She called, her voice cracking from limited use. Is someone there? Please help. The response was immediate shouts, the clattering of equipment, boots on stone. Within minutes, she found herself surrounded by astonished cavalrymen, their rifles raised until they registered her gender and appearance. Miss Keller. The government agent pushed forward, disbelief etched on his features. My God, you're alive. Sarah summoned every acting skill she possessed, presenting the bewildered, grateful survivor they expected to find. Yes, she had been lost during a storm. Yes, she had survived alone, finding shelter in caves, subsisting on berries and whatever small game she could trap. No, she had seen no one else in the mountains, certainly no Apache. Her ankle had been injured, slowing her progress. She had been trying to find her way back for weeks. The deception tasted bitter, but Sarah maintained her performance flawlessly. The patrol, jubilant at this unexpected success, escorted her down the mountain with solicitous attention. The sergeant offered his canteen, the deputy his spare blanket against the autumn chill. Only the Indian agent studied her with calculating eyes, asking pointed questions about specific locations, particular caves, any smoke or fires she might have observed. I'm sorry, Sarah repeated, meeting his gaze with practiced innocence. I was simply trying to survive. I paid little attention to landmarks. By evening, They reached Manzanita Springs, where Sarah's arrival created a sensation. Mrs. Abernathy wept genuine tears of relief. The storekeeper organized an impromptu celebration. Sarah's students presented her with drawings and small gifts, their excitement at her miraculous return unmarred by the skepticism some adults poorly concealed. "Mighty lucky," observed the blacksmith, "for a city woman to survive alone in those mountains." "The Lord provides," Sarah replied with a serene smile that revealed nothing. The next days passed in a blur of attention and obligations. A doctor from the neighboring town examined her, marveling at her good health despite her ordeal. The settlement council convened a special meeting to hear her account. Letters arrived from the territorial governor and education board, commending her remarkable survival. Through it all, Sarah maintained her facade while methodically executing her plan. She informed the school board that while she was grateful for their concern, her experience had left her unable to continue teaching in such proximity to the mountains. She had accepted a position in Tucson, she explained, where she might recover from her ordeal among more extensive civilization. "But your contract," Mrs. Abernathy protested. "I'll honor the terms," Sarah assured her. Financial penalty for early termination, paid in full. She had been frugal with her salary. The sum wouldn't leave her destitute. Preparations for departure consumed the following weeks. Sarah sold what few possessions she couldn't carry, purchased supplies for her journey, and arranged passage on the weekly stagecoach. All the while, she maintained her performance. The grateful survivor, the delicate Easterner shaken by wilderness, the dedicated teacher regretfully moving on. Privately, she counted days until the full moon, her true destination not Tucson but Spirit Canyon, where Tohono would be waiting. The story stone remained in her pocket always, a tangible reminder that the life she was leaving behind was not the one that mattered most. The morning of her departure dawned clear and cold. The stagecoach would depart at noon, carrying Sarah ostensibly toward Tucson but in reality only as far as the crossroads 30 miles south, where she would disembark and double back toward the mountains under cover of darkness. As she closed her small valise, a knock sounded at her door. The Indian agent stood outside, his thin smile failing to warm his calculating eyes. "Miss Keller, may I speak with you before your departure?" Sarah's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "Of course. Please come in." He declined to sit, instead pacing her small room with predatory awareness. "I've been reviewing your remarkable story of survival," he began. "Most impressive for a woman alone. Most impressive indeed." "I was fortunate," Sarah replied carefully. "Indeed." He stopped before her small writing desk, where her journal lay. "I wonder if you recorded your experiences? Such an account would make fascinating reading." "I'm afraid not," Sarah lied. "I had no materials for writing during my ordeal." The agent nodded, unconvinced. "Miss Keller, I've spent 15 years in Indian affairs. I know these mountains, these Apache." His voice hardened. "And I know when I'm being misled." Sarah maintained her composed expression through sheer force of will. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "I suggest nothing," he replied. "I merely observe that a woman of your background would find it nearly impossible to survive alone as you claim. I observe that your health and appearance belie weeks of exposure and starvation. And I observe that certain Apache, renegades, have been known to take white captives." The implication hung venomously in the air between them. "That's absurd," Sarah responded, genuine indignation coloring her voice. "And deeply offensive." "Is it?" The agent stepped closer. "Then you wouldn't object to postponing your departure while we conduct a more thorough investigation?" Before Sarah could respond, another knock interrupted their confrontation. Mrs. Abernathy's voice called through the door. "Sarah, the stagecoach is arriving early. You must hurry." The agent's face twisted with frustration. "This isn't concluded, Miss Keller." "I believe it is," Sarah replied with newfound steel in her voice. "Excuse me, I have a stage to catch." She brushed past him, valise in hand, heart hammering against her ribs. On the street below, The expected commotion of the stagecoach arrival provided welcome cover for her rattled nerves. Townspeople gathered to bid her farewell, slowing the agent's pursuit with their bodies and well wishes. As Sarah took her seat in the coach, she caught a glimpse of the agent speaking urgently to the deputy. Their eyes tracked her with unmistakable suspicion. The stage lurched forward, and Sarah fixed her gaze resolutely ahead, refusing to acknowledge the growing certainty that her deception had not been entirely successful. Miles from town, as the stagecoach labored up a steep grade, Sarah glanced out the window and momentarily stopped breathing. There, on a distant ridge, a solitary figure on horseback watched the road. Though too far to distinguish features, she knew with bone-deep certainty that Tohono was keeping pace with her journey, a silent guardian ensuring her safe passage. Hours later, at the dusty crossroads where she had planned to disembark, Sarah made a split-second decision. The agent's suspicions, the deputy's watchful eyes. The risk was too great for her original plan. Instead of leaving the stage, she remained seated, allowing it to carry her further south. Only at nightfall, when the coach stopped at a remote way station, did she slip away unnoticed. Tohono, who had shadowed the stage with uncanny precision, was waiting with 2 horses in a sheltered arroyo beyond the station. "You were followed," he stated simply when she reached him. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "They suspect. Then we cannot return to mountains they know." Tohono helped her mount the second horse, a skill she had never learned but would need now. "Must go further. Different territory." "Where?" Sarah asked, settling awkwardly in the unfamiliar saddle. Tohono pointed south and west, toward distant peaks barely visible in the starlight. "Apache lands, old places, where even Indian agents fear to follow." As they rode into the desert night, leaving behind the last vestiges of white civilization, Sarah felt neither fear nor regret, only a profound sense of rightness, of movement toward rather than away from her true destination. The journal she carried, filled with their shared language and interwoven stories, would eventually be discovered a century later in a remote cave, its pages a testament to what had transpired between a lost teacher and a solitary warrior. Scholars would debate its authenticity, its unlikely account of 2 people who created something unique from the broken pieces of colliding worlds. But on that night, under stars that watched with ancestral eyes, Sarah Keller and Tohono rode toward an uncertain future with the only certainty that mattered: that the greatest journeys are not measured in miles traversed, but in the distance between who we were and who we become when we find, against all odds and expectations, the place where our heart can finally speak its true language.